This is Dante Williams, and you're watching
Dante's
Boxing Nation.
This is Showtime Sean Porter.
Filipino Flash, Jesse Burns.
This is Al Bernstein. You're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.
Hi, I'm Sugar Ray.
Chick Shape.
Search over last name, more.
Dante's Boxing Nation.
Boom, 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 boom. Yo, this is Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder.
My name is Gennady Golovkin.
And you're watching
Dante's Boxing Nation.
Hi, this is Julian Jackson, and this is Dante Boxing Nation.
This is Julia Jackson, and you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation. All right. Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So as you guys probably already know by now, Gennady Golovkin's next opponent will most likely be Chris Eubank from the UK. Now, most people don't give Eubank that much of a chance to pull off the upset and beat Golovkin, but there's one fighter that believes that he can pull off the upset. Matter of fact, that fighter is heavyweight David Haye. Now, what's so interesting about David Haye's perspective when it comes to this fight is David Haye actually sparred with Chris Eubank. And from him sparring with Chris Eubank as a heavyweight, for you to hear a heavyweight basically say, I think this guy can beat or possibly, match up very well with Gennady Golovkin, it's an interesting take. Chris Eubank Sr., he actually did an interview and he was explaining why he believed his son, Chris Eubank Jr., could actually beat Gennady Golovkin. And he said, not because of what Eubank has already done in the ring, it's what he did in sparring. Eubank Sr. said he watched his son spar with a heavyweight. He said Eubank took this heavyweight's best punches and never got hurt. And it's not like the heavyweight took it easy on Eubank Jr. Now, with David Haye coming out and saying this, I'm assuming that heavyweight Eubank Sr. was referring to was David Haye. This is what David Haye had to say about this potential fight. Quote, the only person at middleweight currently who has the ability, mindset, and nerve to beat Golovkin is Chris Eubank Jr. I've seen him up close, I've sparred with him, I've watched him spar with Carl Froch and George Groves, who are both a weight above him, and he always gives a great account of himself. End quote. So that's what top contender David Haye had to say about Chris Eubank's chances against Gennady Golovkin. Now, when David Haye says that Chris Eubank actually sparred with David Haye, that is impressive. But Eubank sparring with Carl Froch and George Groves, only one division above his, is not really that impressive because fighters do that all the time. I've watched Gennady Golovkin, who's a middleweight, spar with light heavyweights. And his trainer, Abel Sanchez, he tells me all the time that Gennady Golovkin spars with cruiserweights and hurts them. So Eubank sparring with Carl Froch, it definitely would prepare him for a fight against someone like Gennady Golovkin, but it's not enough to obviously give him some type of edge. Now, one thing I will say about fighters like Gennady Golovkin, when they have all of that power, he's used to a certain type of reaction from his opponents. Either they stagger, they drop, or they panic and they get on their bicycle, they back up to the ropes, and now Gennady Golovkin, he has them exactly where he wants them. So the big question is, how does Gennady Golovkin respond if he gets a different type of reaction from one of his opponents? Meaning, maybe that opponent walks through his punches and continues to fight. What if his opponent can hurt him just as bad as Gennady can hurt his opponent? These are situations that Gennady Golovkin has never been in before. So we don't really know how Gennady Golovkin is going to react in a situation like that. And what Chris Eubank Sr. was basically saying when he said, my son has sparred with heavyweights, he was basically saying, I know that my son is durable. He can walk through hard punches. But we don't know if Gennady Golovkin can do the same thing. We don't know how Golovkin is going to react when he is dealing with a serious amount of adversity. And that is what makes a champion a special champion, dealing with adversity. When things are not going the way that you perfectly planned it to go. You were expecting someone to pitch you one of those big ass softballs, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they pull an audible, and now they're pitching a hard ball, and they're throwing a curveball at the same time. Can you still knock the ball out of the park? That is the type of adversity that we need to see with Gennady Golovkin. Now, I don't know if we're going to see that with Golovkin facing Chris Eubank, but it is a little refreshing that finally there is someone that Golovkin is facing that actually wanted to fight him, as opposed to someone just getting a surprise phone call from Golovkin's people. Hey, you want to fight Golovkin in 2 months? Okay, I'll take the fight. Sure, I guess. You know, it's not one of those situations. This is one of them situations where Chris Eubank is calling out Golovkin. There hasn't been too many fighters calling out Golovkin. At least not too many fighters that are on Golovkin's level or beyond. Now, this fight is interesting for many different reasons, because of the fact that Eubank is actually calling out Gennady Golovkin, because of the fact that this fight will be in Chris Eubank's backyard and not Gennady Golovkin's backyard, if Golovkin even has a backyard. Not saying the fight will play out exactly like this fight that I'm about to mention, but this fight is very reminiscent of the Ricky Hatton versus Kostya Tszyu fight. You had an underdog UK fighter who was fighting against pound for pound top 3, one of the best fighters in the world, the favorite Kostya Tszyu. Okay? No one really gave Ricky Hatton a chance in that fight, despite the fact Ricky Hatton was undefeated. Nobody really gave him a chance against Kostya Tszyu. And guess what? Ricky Hatton pulled off the upset and stopped the pound for pound champion, Kostya Tszyu. So I'm just saying, I think about that fight when I think of this one right here. But when it comes to Chris Eubank, a lot of people believe that Chris Eubank is not one of the best middleweights in the world because he hasn't really beat anyone, which is true. The one blemish on his record is the biggest step up that Eubank ever had, which was against BJ Saunders. He lost to Saunders. It would have been real nice if Chris Eubank would have actually beat Saunders and then fought Golovkin. It would make the fight even bigger. Or if Eubank would have avenged that loss and came back and beat Saunders in the rematch. That would have just made this fight just that much bigger, but you know, it is what it is. And we're going to see. We're going to see if Golovkin or we're going to see if Chris Eubank actually has a chance. We'll know very soon. I think this is one of them fights where you're going to know how much of a chance Eubank has in the first 2 rounds. Now, I talked about Eubank versus Tom Doran, his last fight where he knocked out a guy once again, wasn't on. Now, Eubank got the job done, knocked him out in about 4 rounds or something like that. But one thing that bothered me in that performance was the fact that Chris Eubank, he was throwing this lazy kind of jab, and Tom Doran was actually able to counter Eubank every time he threw the jab. So I don't know if this was just a case of Eubank fighting to the level of his competition, but if he does that against Gennady Golovkin, he gets knocked out. Because once again, if he throws that lazy ass jab, Golovkin is going to counter him with the perfect overhand right. And from that point on, it'll be all downhill for Chris Eubank. So once again, maybe he was just doing that because of him being in the ring with a guy by the name of Tom Doran. We'll see. I mean, definitely we've seen fighters step up to the level of their competition. We'll find out if Chris Eubank has that extra gear. So that's pretty much all I got for now. I'm on to the next one.
Hi, you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.